Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. Tonight's story is not just creepy. It's the kind of story that sticks with you. Back in 1974, a whole logging camp in Alaska just vanished. No trace, no warning. They were buried in ice and never seen again. Let's get into it. So, there was this logging company, right? Small operation. Nothing fancy. Not the kind of place that shows up in headlines or has big investors. Just a bunch of regular guys trying to make some cash. They didn't have a name people would remember. Just a number. Company 9. That's what the paperwork said. And honestly, maybe that's for the best. Maybe it's better we don't know their real name. They were sent up north to set up a seasonal camp deep in the woods near the Alaska-Yukon border. A place so far off the map, you couldn't even find it on GPS today. The locals called the area Frost Hollow. And when the company bought the rights to log there, they didn't think twice about the name. Sounded kind of poetic. Cold, sure, but manageable. They figured they'd spend 3 months felling trees, shipping logs, and then be out before the spring melt. Quick job, easy money. They brought in 15 men. Rough types. Not criminals or anything, just the kind of folks who don't mind isolation, who maybe even prefer it. Guys who'd worked in camps before, used to bad food, no women, and endless cold. There was also a foreman named James Caldwell, ex-military, tough but fair. People respected him, and he knew how to keep order. They also brought along Earl, the camp cook. Big guy, loved to talk. Said he used to be a chef in Juneau before life got complicated. And then there was Baxter, the dog. Some say he was a mix of husky and something else. Smart as hell and loyal. He wasn't just a pet, he was part of the team. They got flown in by chopper. No roads led to Frost Hollow. The only way in or out was air or maybe a week-long hike through freezing terrain. The camp was set up in a clearing between thick pine woods and a frozen river. Cabins were simple. Wood walls, tin roofs, small stoves to keep warm. They had a mess hall, a supply shed, and one radio shack that never seemed to work right. At first, everything went according to plan. Trees were chopped, logs were stacked, and the men got into a routine. Mornings started before dawn with hot coffee and cold boots. The sound of chainsaws echoed through the valley most of the day. Nights were for drinking, card games, and telling stories by the fire. No one complained. The pay was good, and the days passed fast. But then, things started to feel off. It wasn't one big moment. It was little stuff. Stuff you could brush off at first. Like the wind. It didn't sound normal. Up there, the wind cuts through the trees like a blade. But sometimes, it almost sounded like whispering. Just under the sound of the wind. Like someone talking from far away. You'd turn your head, thinking a buddy was calling you. But no one would be there. The first one to mention it was Earl. One night, he said, "I swear I heard someone say my name out by the tree line." The guys laughed, told him to lay off the whiskey. But a few others admitted they'd heard weird stuff too. Not voices, exactly, but sounds that didn't belong. And then there were the trees. You'd think, in a logging camp, trees wouldn't be a big deal. They're just wood, right? But these trees, they were tall, too tall, and packed tight. Even in broad daylight, the forest looked dark. And no matter how many they cut down, it never seemed to change. The clearing didn't feel any bigger. The trees just stood there, thick and unmoving, like they were watching. James, the foreman, started noticing things too. Equipment would go missing and then turn up in the wrong place. Axes stuck in trees they hadn't marked. A whole pile of logs once vanished overnight. No tracks, no explanation. He tried to keep the men calm, said maybe snow buried the logs or someone misplaced them. But you could see it in his face. He didn't believe that either. And then there were the nights. At first, everyone had their own cabin. But as the weirdness grew, guys started bunking together just to feel safer. Baxter, the dog, started acting strange, too. He'd growl at corners of the room, bark at the woods, refuse to go outside some nights. He even bit one of the loggers, something he'd never done before. Earl joked, maybe he's picking up something we can't. No one said it out loud, but people started looking over their shoulders more, working in pairs, whispering at dinner instead of laughing. It was like the camp was shrinking in on itself, like the cold wasn't just in the air, it was in their heads. The radio still didn't work. Every day, someone would try it, tapping the dials, calling for base. Static, silence, more static. No answer ever came. And you have to understand, up there, being disconnected like that does something to a person. You start to feel like maybe the world forgot you, that you don't really exist anymore. One guy, Tyler, started carving tally marks into the cabin wall. One for every day, he said. But a week later, he stopped. Said the number didn't feel right anymore. Like the days weren't passing the way they should. The temperature dropped lower than expected. Way lower. Tools froze. Pipes burst. One morning, they found the mess hall door wide open and everything inside coated in ice, like something had sucked all the heat out. Earl swore he closed it the night before. No one blamed him, but everyone felt it. Something had been in there. And then there were the dreams. That's when things really started to change. Almost everyone began having the same nightmare. Not exact details, but the same feeling. Being buried in snow. Trapped. Unable to breathe. Some said they saw a figure in the ice. A shadow with no face. One guy Luis woke up screaming, said it was calling to him. "It's under us," he kept repeating. "It's under us." They chalked it up to stress, to cabin fever. But still, James ordered the team to rotate cabin mates more frequently. Keep people talking. Keep things normal, whatever that meant. Then came the night. The lights went out. The generator died just after midnight. Total blackout. The only light came from the moon and the flicker of one emergency lantern in the radio shack. The men gathered in the mess hall, huddled together in silence. Baxter barked like mad, scratching at the door. Someone opened it to calm him, but the dog bolted into the woods. Just ran into the trees, like he saw something. They shouted. They followed, 5 of them with flashlights. But Baxter was gone. They searched until morning. Found nothing but snow and silence. The trail ended at the edge of the river. His tracks just stopped. No blood, no broken ice, just the leash twisted around a pine root, frozen, stiff. That was the moment it all turned. The men started whispering about going home, about hiking out, even if it took days. James told them to wait, that the supply chopper was due in a... Some say the camp changed after that. The cold got worse. The trees seemed closer. The whispering at night got louder. And even though no one saw anything, they all felt watched. Like the woods were full of eyes. And still, no one left. Maybe they were too scared. Maybe it was already too late. The first week had passed without much trouble. The men worked, ate, and slept like clockwork. They were used to the cold, the isolation, even the long days where the sun barely rose above the trees. Out here in the Alaskan wilderness, time felt like a distant concept. It didn't matter if it was Monday or Friday. Just another day of logging. Another night in the freezing dark. But after that first week, something subtle started to shift. It began with the sounds. At first, it was easy to ignore. A crack in the ice here. A branch snapping there. That's normal in a forest, especially with cold this deep. But these sounds didn't match the usual rhythm of the woods. They came at odd times, late into the night, when the wind had died down and the world was supposed to be asleep. It wasn't the kind of noise that made you jump. It was the kind that made you stop breathing for a second, just to listen again, to make sure you weren't imagining it. Several of the guys reported hearing footsteps, not heavy boots crunching in the snow. These were softer, lighter, almost cautious, like someone or something was circling the cabins. One night, Tommy, the youngest of the crew, woke up thinking he heard whispering just outside his wall. He grabbed his coat and stepped outside. flashlight in hand, only to find the snow untouched. No prints, no wind, just that thick, unnatural silence that hangs in the air when something's watching you, even if you can't see it. The men tried to laugh it off. They called it cabin fever, blamed it on the isolation, the whiskey. Soon, it wasn't just sounds. Things began to move. Earl, the cook, was the first to notice. He had a habit of stacking wood in a neat pile outside the mess hall every night. But one morning, the pile was scattered. Not knocked over like a bear had come through, but rearranged. In a circle. Perfectly even. Like someone had done it slowly and carefully. Earl didn't say much about it, just stared at the circle for a long time before kicking it apart and starting over. Others began finding odd things too. A pair of gloves hung neatly on a tree branch, 10 feet off the ground. A set of boot prints that led into the woods but never came out. James, the foreman, tried to investigate. He wasn't the superstitious type. Former army, tough, logical. But even he couldn't explain it. He started doing nightly rounds, walking between cabins with his rifle and a flashlight. Every time, he came back empty-handed. But that didn't make anyone feel better. And there was the issue of the ice. Near the river, a few of the men noticed something beneath it. At first, they thought it was a frozen log. But as the days passed and they kept checking, it seemed to shift. Not like it was floating, more like it was turning or growing. One night, Tommy swore he saw a shape under the ice that looked like a hand. He ran back to camp, pale as a ghost. James went to look, but by then, it was gone. Just smooth, dark ice and the reflection of the moon. That was the same night the radio flared up. It had been dead for days, maybe weeks. Static, white noise, the occasional pop of interference. But this night, just after midnight, it made a sharp, buzzing sound that woke Earl up from his bunk. He rushed to the radio shack and found the speaker glowing faintly. At first, it was just crackles. But then, a voice, garbled, low, a few words came through. Help, something, under, cold. Then it screamed, this awful, metallic screech like metal grinding against bone. Then, silence. No one slept that night. Not really. They stayed in pairs. Some even bunked in the mess hall, pretending it was warmer there. But it wasn't about the cold anymore. It was about what they didn't understand, what they couldn't explain. By now, no one was talking about getting paid. The mood had changed. The job didn't matter. Survival was on everyone's mind, even if they didn't say it out loud. And it wasn't just the fear of something outside. It was the fear of what was happening to them too. The men were changing. Luis, a quiet guy from New Mexico, started talking to himself. Long, rambling sentences that made no sense. Sometimes in English, sometimes in Spanish, sometimes not in any language the others recognized. He claimed he could hear voices coming from under the ground, calling his name through the frozen dirt. One night, he dug a hole near the supply shed, saying he was trying to find the source. James had to drag him back inside, frostbite already setting into his fingers. Others reported strange dreams, not just nightmares. These were vivid, shared hallucinations. Several of them dreamed about a woman made of ice, standing in the forest, her face cracked like a broken mask. She would raise her hand slowly, and everything around them would go silent. No birds, no wind, not even their own heartbeat. Then she would vanish, leaving behind only cold. No one could explain how they all saw the same figure. But they did. The final straw came when one of the crew, a man named Rick, disappeared. It was a regular day, or as regular as they got anymore. Rick was supposed to check the fuel drums behind the shed. He left after lunch and didn't come back. They looked for hours. There were no signs of a struggle, no tracks, even though the snow was fresh, like he had stepped off the earth and vanished into thin air. That night, they found his jacket neatly folded on his bed, something Rick would never do. And on top of it was a single pine cone, frozen solid. James called a meeting. He told everyone to pack light, be ready to move at first light. They would hike out together all the way to the closest outpost. It would take days, but he didn't care. Something was wrong, and he didn't want to lose anyone else. But the forest, it wasn't done with them yet. That night, the snow returned harder than ever, a full whiteout. Temperatures dropped to record lows. The wind screamed through the cracks in the walls, and outside there were shapes moving in the dark. Not animals, not people, something else, something slower, watching. One of the cabins was found empty the next morning. No signs of escape, no broken window, just an open door and untouched snow at the threshold. The bed was still warm. By now, even James stopped pretending he had answers. The camp was no longer just cold. It was wrong. Wrong in the way a dead forest is silent. Wrong in the way a shadow moves when there's no light source. Wrong in the way the snow fell perfectly straight, even when there was no wind. And through it all, there was the constant feeling of being followed, watched, not just by something physical, but by something older, something that had been sleeping for a long time and had finally opened its eyes. Baxter wasn't just any dog. He was a part of the crew. They didn't bring him for show. He had a purpose. He was sharp, loyal, and had that kind of sixth sense animals sometimes do. You know the type. Ears perk up before anyone hears a sound, growls at things no one else can see, and refuses to cross a line you don't even know is there. Everyone trusted Baxter. If he barked, you paid attention. If he growled, you grabbed your flashlight. And if he ever ran, well, No one thought he ever would. During the first few weeks in Frost Hollow, Baxter had been as steady as ever. He slept curled near the fire in the mess hall, trotted alongside the crew during logging hours, and barked at shadows that turned out to be nothing more than trees. But even then, something had changed in him. The dog that used to chase snowflakes now flinched at the wind. The dog that wagged his tail when anyone got close started sticking by just one person, James, the foreman, and then even that stopped. Baxter started sleeping under the radio shack instead of near people. He ate less. He whined at night. Nobody said anything, but they all noticed. Then came the night that none of them would ever forget. It was just after midnight. The camp was quiet. Too quiet. No wind, no creaking wood. Even the forest outside seemed to be holding its breath. The kind of silence that presses down on your chest, heavy and unnatural. The men had started sleeping in groups by this point, pushing bunks together in two of the larger cabins. Nobody liked being alone anymore, and the buddy system wasn't just a suggestion, it was the rule. Earl, the cook, was the one who heard Baxter first. A low growl, deep and threatening, like he was warning something off. Earl sat up in his bunk, confused. He thought maybe Baxter had gotten into a fight with one of the other dogs. Then he remembered there were no other dogs. By the time the others woke up, Baxter was barking like mad. Not his usual bark, either. This was different. Desperate. Aggressive. Like he was scared out of his mind and trying to scare whatever was out there even more. James rushed to the door, threw it open, and saw Baxter at the edge of the clearing, facing the woods, teeth bared and fur standing straight up. And then, without warning, the dog bolted. He ran straight into the trees, full speed, like he was chasing, or maybe running from, something. James shouted after him. So did Earl. A few of the guys threw on coats and boots, grabbed flashlights, and took off after him. The rest stayed behind, huddled inside, waiting for that bark to come back. But it never did. Out in the forest, the snow was fresh and untouched. The men followed Baxter's tracks for a while. They were easy to spot, deep paw prints, clear in the moonlight. But after maybe 15 minutes of walking, they just stopped. No fading, no scattering, just gone. Like something had picked him up out of the snow and carried him away. The flashlights scanned the area over and over, landing on nothing but trees. More trees, and that suffocating stillness. Then they found the leash. It was Baxter's. No doubt. Leather strap, metal clip. Frozen solid, coiled tightly around the root of a pine tree. But there were no signs of struggle, no blood, no broken branches. Just that leash, as if someone or something had carefully wrapped it there like a gift. They stood there for a long time, saying nothing. Then they turned back. Back at camp. The mood shifted. Whatever hope they'd been holding on to cracked that night. It wasn't just a dog going missing. It was the only living thing they trusted, vanishing into thin air. Baxter had always known things, had always sensed what the others couldn't, and now he was gone. They locked their doors that night, every single one of them. Some even pushed furniture in front of the entrances, even though the cabins weren't built for that. James passed out rifles from the supply shed. Most of the men had never held one before, but no one refused. No one even questioned it. They took turns staying awake, listening, waiting. And in that silence, they began to hear it. Not loud, not aggressive, just wrong. There were footsteps outside, not crunching footsteps. These were soft, shallow, like someone trying not to be heard. They circled the cabins slowly, methodically, never running, never stopping. Just a slow, deliberate pace. Sometimes they paused just outside the windows, long enough for someone inside to hold their breath. Then they moved on. A few brave souls peeked out. Nothing, just darkness and snow. But the footsteps kept coming. And then came the tapping. It started on Earl's cabin. Soft knocks on the window, rhythmic and steady. Then it moved to the door. 3 slow taps. Silence. Then again. Always in 3s. Never more, never less. Like something was testing them. James walked the halls that night, with his rifle in hand and a dead look in his eyes. He didn't speak, he just listened. By morning, there were no tracks in the snow. None. The snow around the cabins was smooth, undisturbed, as if the night before had been a dream. But the men knew better. They had heard it. They had felt it. And they were sure of one thing now. Whatever took Baxter was still out there, and it wasn't done. That morning, Earl found something behind the mess hall. He didn't say anything at first, just stood there staring at it until James came to see. It was a single paw print, frozen perfectly in the snow, but not like Baxter's. No claws, toes too long. The shape was wrong. It was like a human hand, but twisted, narrow, and heavy enough to sink deeper into the snow than a grown man's boot. No one said a word. They just walked away, one by one, without speaking. From that day on, the men moved differently. Slower, tighter. They stuck together, like sheep watching the woods for wolves. The laughter was gone. So were the stories, the card games, and the late-night whiskey. All that was left was quiet meals, shivering sleep, and the constant fear that something was waiting just outside the door. James stopped using the radio altogether. He said the static had changed, that it didn't sound like static anymore. It sounded like breathing, and sometimes whispers. He dismantled the radio with his bare hands, piece by piece, and threw the parts into the snow. Some say he did it to protect them. Others think he did it to keep them from hearing the truth. One night, Lewis started drawing on the walls with charcoal. Strange symbols, circles with lines, shapes with too many corners. He didn't explain them, just stared at them for hours. When someone asked what they were, he said, "They came to Baxter first. Now they're coming to us." By the end of the week, one of the cabins had been abandoned. No one would sleep there anymore. The men said it was too cold, that the floor creaked too much, that they heard someone breathing under the bed. But everyone knew the real reason. That was Baxter's cabin. And even though he was gone, sometimes at night, they still heard him bark, far off, echoing through the trees. But no matter how long they listened, that bark never got closer, and that was the most terrifying part of all. James Caldwell was the kind of man who didn't rely on hope. He believed in tools, in discipline, in backup plans. That's what made him a good foreman. When the crew began hearing things in the woods, when Baxter vanished without a trace, and when the men began speaking in half-whispers about things moving in the snow, James didn't pray or panic. He went to the old radio shack and started trying to fix the emergency transmitter. It was an ugly thing, heavy, rusted in places, older than most of the crew. It hadn't worked properly since they arrived. The manufacturer probably went out of business in the 60s. But James had served in the military. He'd worked with worse. And on that particular night, he sat hunched over the console, turning knobs, tightening wires with trembling fingers, and a flashlight between his teeth. All while something deep inside him told him he was already too late. The wind outside was picking up, whistling through the gaps in the walls. The snow tapped gently against the glass. The rest of the crew was huddled in the cabins, weapons in hand, barely speaking. Nobody had gone outside, alone, since Baxter disappeared. James didn't tell anyone he was trying the radio again. He didn't want to give them hope. Not yet. Not until he heard a voice on the other end. Any voice. Base camp, another foreman, even a weather station. He didn't care. He just needed proof that the outside world was still out there. That they weren't forgotten. The machine sputtered to life just after 2 a.m. It didn't start with static. It started with cold. James would later struggle to explain this, but he said the room temperature dropped the moment he hit the power switch. Like the heat from the stove was being pulled out of the air. He could see his breath, even though the fire was still burning. At first, it was faint, like someone breaking glass underwater. A crackle, then a stretch, It sounded wrong. Not electronic, not mechanical. It sounded like ice. Thick, ancient ice splintering under pressure. The sound vibrated through the floorboards, rattling the metal frame of the shack. It crept into James's bones like a virus. He froze. He didn't touch the dial. He didn't speak. He just listened. Then the scream came. It wasn't human. It wasn't animal. It was long. Too long. And filled with something that wasn't pain, but something deeper. Something older. It rose and fell like a broken siren, like it came from a throat that hadn't spoken in 1,000 years and was now tearing itself open just to be heard. James dropped the flashlight. It clattered to the floor and went out, but the scream kept going. He backed away from the radio, heart pounding. The shack walls creaked. The glass window fogged instantly from the inside. The fire in the stove dimmed. And just as suddenly as it began, it stopped. Silence fell over Frost Hollow. Not normal silence, the kind that hurts your ears. The kind that feels like you've gone deaf. The kind that feels alive. James stood there in the dark for several seconds before he realized he wasn't alone. He turned slowly toward the doorway, half expecting to see something standing there. Something that matched the voice he just heard. But there was nothing. Just the wind howling across the clearing. And still, he couldn't move. That's when the others arrived. Earl and a few of the crew had heard it too, not through the radio, but echoing across the snow. They said the scream wasn't just inside the shack. It had come from the trees, from all around. Some said it came from beneath the ground. They opened the shack door and found James standing perfectly still, pale, eyes wide, staring at the dead radio. One of them reached for it. James slapped his hand away without a word. Then he picked up the stove poker and smashed the radio 3 times until it sparked and hissed, and finally died for good. No one stopped him. No one asked why. Because they'd heard it too. They never tried to use the radio again. That night, no one slept. The firewood burned low in every cabin. And no one dared step outside to fetch more. The sky was too black, the snow too still. It was like the forest had paused, like it was listening, like it was waiting. Luis started muttering again in his sleep, whispering words that didn't make sense. Tommy stared out the window all night, saying he thought he saw someone standing in the tree line. James sat by the door with a rifle in his lap and eyes that didn't blink for hours. He didn't speak, not even when Earl brought him hot coffee. He just sat there, gripping the gun, watching the snow fall, one flake at a time. The next morning, something was different. No birds. Not that there were many to begin with, but now there were none. No distant calls, no flutter of wings. The forest was a grave. The air felt heavy, like the oxygen had thickened into something else, and the ice near the river. It had changed. It was darker now, cloudy, like something had stirred beneath it. The men didn't go near it. They barely looked at it. James finally spoke that afternoon. He called the crew into the mess hall and told them no one was to go near the radio shack, not even to clean it, not for firewood. It was off limits. He didn't explain. He didn't need to. The next day, one of the men found writing scratched into the back wall of the shack. It wasn't there before. No one claimed to have done it. It wasn't written in ink or charcoal. It was gouged into the wood with something sharp. Too precise to be done in a panic. The words read, "It hears you when you speak. It follows when you call. The ice is not asleep." James had the wall torn out and burned behind the shed. Still, the writing appeared again the next night. This time, inside one of the cabins. No one had touched the radio, but it seemed that whatever they had awakened was listening. From that point on, conversations were short. Names weren't spoken aloud. The men started pointing instead of calling each other. They refused to say their own names out loud. Luis even tore the name patch off his jacket and threw it into the fire. They believed the voice was still out there, and they were sure it remembered what it had heard. That night, the air turned warmer, strangely. The snow softened slightly. But that only made it worse, because in the morning, something new had appeared. Just outside the main cabin, a single boot. Not old, not frozen over, still warm. One of theirs, except everyone still had both of their boots, which meant it wasn't left behind. It was given back, and whatever had taken it knew exactly where to find them. Of course, here's the fully developed Chapter 5 of your horror story. Buried in Ice, the Alaska camp that vanished, written in a continuous, cinematic narration style, without subheadings. It expands your original concept to over 1,500 words, maintaining the eerie tone and slow-burning dread you've built in previous chapters. Weeks passed in that frozen place, and with each passing day, something in the air grew heavier, thicker. It wasn't just the snow, or the wind, or the cold that bit deeper than before. It was in the silence between the men, in the way no one looked each other in the eye anymore, in the way even the fire seemed quieter, as if it too was afraid to crackle too loud. Supplies ran low. They were never supposed to be out there that long. The schedule was tight. Work for a month, then rotate out. But now it had been nearly 2, maybe more. No one was counting days anymore. Time didn't feel right. Some said the sun looked dimmer. Others said the moon was always full. No one trusted the sky. No one trusted the clocks. And no one talked about the chopper that never came. The food was mostly gone. They stretched it thin. Old canned beans, jerky, powdered soup. Water came from melted snow, and even that started tasting strange. Metal and something else. Something bitter. A few guys got sick. Real quiet like. No fever. Just distant. Slow. Like their bodies were shutting down piece by piece, and they didn't mind. Then came the note. It was found early one morning, frozen to the door of Earl's cabin, the cook. The handwriting was shaky, like written by someone whose hands wouldn't stop trembling. The paper was torn from the corner of one of the foreman's old logbooks. No name, no signature, just one sentence. We shouldn't have cut the old trees. We woke something up. James read it aloud, voice low and careful. No one reacted at first. No one even moved. Just stood there in the snow, shoulders hunched, watching the words like they might bleed. Earl swore he didn't write it, said he hadn't left his cabin since nightfall, and judging by his pale face and shaking breath, he was telling the truth. The note was burned that afternoon. No one talked about it again, but the damage was already done. That same day, a man named Harris went out for firewood. He said he'd only be 10 minutes. He took an axe and a small sled. Didn't even bother to wear his heavy coat. He never came back. At first, they assumed he got turned around or maybe fell and hurt his leg. They waited a couple hours. Then James took 3 men and went out to look. They found the sled upright, axe stuck in a tree. No footprints, no trail, like he'd vanished in the middle of a step. They called his name until their throats were raw. Nothing answered. When they returned, no one asked what happened. They didn't need to. That night, Tommy disappeared. He was just a kid, youngest in the crew. Spent most of his time in Earl's cabin, helping with meals, trying to stay close to the warmth and light. But sometime between sunset and sunrise, he was gone. His bunk was empty, his boots still by the door. The cabin door was locked from the inside. There were no broken windows, no forced exit. But Tommy was gone. James was different after that. Harder, colder. He didn't yell. He didn't panic. He just stopped sleeping. Luis started drawing again. Symbols on the floor, on the walls, on the cabin doors. He said they were wards, protection from what breathes beneath. When asked what that meant, he only replied, "It's awake now. It wants us quiet." By the end of the week, 2 more men vanished. Each time, the same pattern. No noise, no signs of struggle, just gone. They left their belongings behind. One guy left a half-eaten piece of bread. Another left a steaming mug of coffee. It was always as if they'd stepped outside for just a second and then slipped through the cracks of the world. James organized shifts, No one left the cabins alone. No one walked further than 10 steps from another person. He armed everyone with whatever was left. Hatchets, broken shovel handles, even flares. Not that any of it mattered. Whatever was taking them wasn't afraid of weapons. That's when the dreams got worse. They weren't dreams, really. More like visits. The men would close their eyes and feel something cold press against their minds. Like a hand. A long, heavy hand made of ice. It would whisper in a language they didn't understand. Some woke up screaming. Others didn't wake up at all. Earl claimed he saw one of the missing. It was chopping kindling behind the mess hall when he looked up and saw Harris standing between 2 trees, just standing, staring. His skin was pale, eyes all black, no whites, no emotion. Earl didn't move, didn't speak. Then, just like smoke, Harris turned and faded into the snow. No footsteps, no noise, just gone. After that, Earl stopped eating. He sat by the stove most days, wrapped in a blanket, muttering to himself. He said the forest was listening, that it knew their names, that it was learning how to sound like them. He said he heard his own voice outside the window one night, calling him to come out, asking for help. James tried to keep the group together. He read from a small Bible every morning, whether anyone listened or not. He kept a fire burning in the middle of camp with whatever scraps they had left. Furniture, crates, even parts of the cabins. The warmth didn't last long. It never did. But it helped remind them they were still alive. Then the final sign came. A set of footprints. They appeared overnight. Huge prints, longer than a man's. Too narrow, with no clear toe pattern. Just impressions, like something heavy had stepped carefully across the camp. The prints started near the edge of the woods and ended in front of the main cabin. Then they disappeared. No return trail, no hint of how it left. And in the snow, between the prints, there were names, written in long, jagged lines, carved into the ice. Every name matched someone in the camp, and 3 of the names were already crossed out. No one spoke after that. No one cried. No one screamed. They simply waited for nightfall, waited for their turn. Absolutely. Below is the fully developed Chapter 6 of your horror story, Buried in Ice, the Alaska camp that vanished, written in a cinematic, immersive narrative style with eerie progression and 1,500 plus words. It maintains the tone and structure of previous chapters, with no subheadings, just a seamless continuation of your chilling legend. The supply chopper came later than expected, almost 2 weeks late, in fact. The crew back at base had chalked up the delay to the usual issues: weather, fuel, paperwork. But eventually, it couldn't wait any longer. A team was sent to check on the Frost Hollow camp, tucked away deep in the Alaskan wilderness. They expected frustration. Maybe a mechanical failure. Maybe a disgruntled foreman demanding another radio. They didn't expect silence. As the chopper descended into the valley, the first thing the pilot noticed was how still everything looked. No movement. No sign of workers out in the open. The trees stood like black spears in the snow, unmoving. The camp itself was half buried under a fresh blanket of white. That wasn't unusual, but the complete lack of tracks was. No paths between buildings, no tire trails from sleds, no sign of people. Still, smoke drifted lazily from a chimney or two. Fires were burning, which meant someone had been there recently. The chopper touched down. No one came out to greet them. No voices, no barking dogs, no footsteps crunching across the ice, just wind. The first man off the bird, a mechanic named Ray, knocked on the mess hall door. No answer. He tried the latch. It wasn't locked. Inside, the fire was still glowing faintly. Half-eaten bowls of soup sat on the table, spoons resting gently across ceramic rims. Coffee still warm. As if the men had just gotten up and stepped away for a second. Ray called out. His voice echoed off the wooden walls and vanished. He turned to the others, face pale. "Something's wrong," he said. They checked the cabins next. Every one of them. Beds were made, or not. Some still looked slept in, blankets tangled. One still had the indents of a body, like someone had been lying there just minutes before. Clothes still hung on hooks, toothbrushes in mugs, one lantern still swinging gently from a nail, like it had been nudged. Nothing smashed, nothing broken, nothing stolen, just empty. It didn't make sense. If they'd evacuated, where were the emergency signals? If it had been a fight, a bear attack, anything, there'd be signs, a struggle, blood, broken glass. But there was nothing, not even the whisper of a footstep in the snow. They split into two teams, combing through every inch of the clearing. Radios in hand, shotguns at the ready, even though no one could explain why. The silence had gotten into them, too. Then someone found the journal. It was under a pile of folded shirts in the foreman's cabin. Just a plain notebook, leather-bound, nothing fancy, the kind you'd buy at a gas station. It had a name scribbled inside the front cover in pen. James Caldwell. First few pages were unremarkable. Crew assignments, supply tallies, a few grumbles about the cold. But then the entries began to shift, bit by bit, lines growing shorter, words more fragmented. Rambling thoughts scrawled with a shaky hand. Trees not right here. Too quiet. Saw something in the ice. Lewis says it. Radio screamed again. Same voice. Can't sleep. Tommy, gone. No tracks. No sound. Just gone. It's picking names. Earl heard it whisper his. We're being erased. The final page was smeared with what looked like melted snow. The ink had bled a little, but one line was still perfectly legible. It's under the ice. We hear it moving at night. Please, don't come here. The men holding the notebook looked at each other without speaking, and then someone noticed the ice. Just beyond the cabins, past the fire pit, was the edge of the frozen river. Normally, it was smooth, white, and undisturbed. But not today. Today, it had collapsed in places, like the top layer had been punctured. Not melted, broken, the way glass might shatter if something pressed from underneath. But there was no water bubbling up, no signs of heat, just black, a dark void beneath the surface that didn't reflect the sky. One of the rescue crew members, a guy named Tanner, knelt beside it and shined his flashlight down. They told him to stop, but it was too late. He said he saw something moving, slowly, just under the surface, like a shape made of shadows. It had no edges, no face, no eyes, just a suggestion of form, a presence. And then it moved, not upward, just sideways, like it was circling them. Tanner dropped the light and stumbled backward, gasping like he'd had the wind knocked out of him. He wouldn't speak for the rest of the day. They left within the hour. No one wanted to sleep there. No one wanted to close their eyes. The pilot radioed in a full evacuation request, said it was a Category 5 ghost camp. Military code for an unexplained disappearance with no immediate signs of foul play, but with signs of something far worse. The journal was taken into evidence. Photos were taken of the site, the food on the table, the untouched snow, the cracked ice. None of the photos came out right. In every single one, the edges blurred. The cabins looked warped. The trees looked like they were leaning in, even though they weren't. And the ice, well, the pictures showed shapes, too faint to say what they were. But something was there, something that didn't like to be captured. The official report concluded that the crew likely suffered exposure, hypothermia, and possible group psychosis brought on by isolation, a tragic loss. No search party was ever sent. Locals, however, knew better. They said the land had always been wrong, that there were places up north where people shouldn't dig or cut or settle, that Frost Hollow had once been something else, a burial ground, a crossing point, a scar in the earth, something left over from before there were names for things. An old trapper, when asked if he'd heard of the place, just said, "Yeah, that's the camp the snow swallowed." Since that day, no one has been back. The camp still sits there, rotting slowly beneath the snow. Fires long since cold, cabins collapsed under their own weight, but the ice is still there, still cracked, still black. And when the wind is just right, some say they still hear it. That long, broken scream echoing across the valley. like a memory that refuses to fade, like something underneath, calling out, waiting. Of course, here's the final chapter, Chapter 7 of your horror story, Buried in Ice. The Alaska camp that vanished expanded into a richly detailed, slow-burning conclusion with over 1,500 words. The tone is consistent with the earlier chapters, eerie, reflective, and unsettling. There are no subheadings, making it perfect for YouTube narration or cinematic storytelling. To this day, no one has gone back to Frost Hollow. Not officially, not knowingly. The coordinates still exist, buried in some old military file or logging company ledger, but no one talks about it. The area has been marked on maps as restricted. No entry, no flyovers, no explanation. Just a thin red line drawn across the snow and the silent warning that some places are better left forgotten. The government never released a full report. The last official statement blamed extreme weather, logistical failure, and potential avalanche activity for the disappearance of the Frost Hollow logging crew. No survivors, the documents read. Cause, exposure, possibly disorientation due to whiteout conditions. But anyone who's lived in Alaska long enough knows that wasn't the whole truth. You can feel it when the name comes up, if it ever does. Most locals won't even say the words, Frost Hollow. They'll just shake their heads, mutter a prayer, and change the subject. There are whispers, though. Stories pass between trappers and bush pilots, told in quiet voices, over crackling fires, or behind closed bar doors in small towns. A few say they flew over that stretch of land and saw something strange. Black shapes beneath the snow, long and shifting, like cracks in glass that weren't there before. One hunter claimed he once hiked near the edge of that no man's land. Said his compass spun the whole time. Said the birds wouldn't fly overhead. Said he heard music, soft, low, distant, coming from under his feet. He never went back. Some believe it was mass hysteria, that the men simply went mad. The cold does strange things to the mind. Isolation, hunger, fear, they can twist a man's thoughts until he sees things that aren't there. Some say they turned on each other, that maybe one man snapped and the rest followed. Maybe there was violence. Maybe they buried each other in the snow, one by one, until there was no one left to dig. It's a neat story. It's comforting, in a way. Humans understand madness, but then there are others, fewer, quieter, who think something else happened. They believe that whatever happened to the Frost Hollow crew wasn't madness. It was contact. These people speak of something ancient, buried beneath the permafrost, far older than the trees above it. Something that slumbers until disturbed, a presence, a force, not alive in the way we know life, but still aware, a thinking thing that waits in the dark, beneath the ice, and when the men cut too deep, dug too close, burned too much of the forest, it noticed them. And once it noticed them, it didn't forget. They say the crew woke it up, and once it's awake, it doesn't go back to sleep. There's an old story some of the older natives used to tell. Long before the Frost Hollow camp ever existed, before the modern borders were even drawn, the tribe spoke of a region where the sky never looked quite right, and where the trees grew too close together, as if trying to hide something. They called it the ground that watches. They believed it was a place where the boundary between this world and something older, colder, was thin. They warned their children never to hunt there, never to walk alone near the ice, and never, under any circumstances, to dig. The logging company, of course, never heard that story. Or maybe they did and ignored it. And now, no one talks about Frost Hollow because silence feels safer. But the strange thing is, the place doesn't seem to decay. A pilot who flew a supply drop for a nearby station in the early 90s claimed he saw the cabins still standing, not collapsed, not covered in snow. Just there, perfectly still, like a photograph frozen in time. He even said he saw a figure standing outside one of the buildings. He radioed in to ask if the area had been reopened. The response? Static. Another hiker. Not that many dare go that way anymore. Found a burned scrap of paper near the border of the closed zone. It was half melted, almost unreadable, but one line remained. It still whispers at night. He left and never spoke of it again. Some believe that those who vanish in the Alaskan wild sometimes don't simply get lost. They get called. Called to something that doesn't speak in words, but in hunger, in cold, in stillness. A thing that doesn't chase you, it waits. Waits for you to come to it. It doesn't need to move. It just opens itself like a mouth in the earth, like a crack in reality. And once you're too close, it takes, not violently, not even loudly, just completely. No footprints, no remains, just absence. And that's the part that haunts people the most about Frost Hollow. The sheer silence of it all. No screams, no fights, no final messages scratched into cabin walls, no last stand. Just people living, talking, breathing, and then gone. Like the forest absorbed them, or the ice opened up and whispered, "Come in." They say sometimes, on the rare days when the wind shifts just right, you can hear something carried on the air from that direction. Not voices, not words. Just a sound that feels too cold for sound, too slow. A low hum beneath everything, like the earth shivering. Maybe it's nothing. Maybe it's just the wind through the pines. Or maybe it's whatever lives under the ice, reminding the world it's still there. Still listening, still awake, and it remembers every name it heard.